We're here today at the Classic Plastics Toy and Comic Expo with Jason Lewis. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm okay.
So Jason is a colorist.
Yep.
How did you get into coloring?
Well, long story short, I originally wanted to be an illustrator. Like, I've been drawing comics since I was a little kid. When I got to college, I kind of figured out that I really wasn't fast enough to be able to draw like a monthly comic. It's way too like reference intensive for me. So I was kind of trying to be more of an illustrator, like a painter when I was in college. Graduated college and kind of figured out that there's really not a lot of people who hire painters. I just had no idea how really to get into the illustration field. You know, it's like, 99% of people you meet in life don't do freelance anything. And the only advice people really have is just like, apply somewhere and get a job, fill out an application. That's not how freelance works at all, basically. So when I got out of college, like I said, I just didn't know how to break into the illustration field and, kind of did some album covers, did some concert posters, kind of the punk rock thing, but, pretty much for friends and, people didn't have any money. So pretty quick, it was just kind of like I had to get a job. So I kind of fell into the graphic design thing for a while, just because I had computer skills when I was in college. So I did graphic design for, most of my 20s. And then, when the economy kind of went under in 2008, I didn't have a graphic design career anymore. So, I was kind of living in Portland at the time, didn't know a lot of people, kind of didn't have any money to do anything. It was just kind of sitting in front of my computer a lot, just trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And I never tried to make art in a computer, and since I had nothing else to do, I was like, well, I'm gonna, spend some money I got for my birthday, and bought a tablet, bought a couple of books on just computer coloring, like, comic coloring, and then that's what I did all day. Like, that was my job. I just kind of got up and would just do, just practice and do, sample art, and I got online, started looking for sample comic art, and started talking on message boards to other comic colorists. And I got hooked up with my first comic gig, which was remastering old comics from Marvel. The comics from the pre-digital age, they were remastering them all, coloring them all on the computer so you can get those dots in them.
Right.
So they looked a bit more modern for, that was when Marvel was setting up their, what's now Marvel Unlimited. I forget what it was called then. So they had a ton of a back catalog they needed colored. So I did that for 3 years. That was my job, and that's what it was. It went from never having done anything comics to working for Marvel, and a lot of times coloring comics I had as a kid, which was kind of neat. But it was kind of one of those things where it's kind of like fossil fuels. We still got some now, but eventually we're going to run out of these, so better figure out something else to do. So I did the Marvel thing for a while, and that was good. And then I got some. Just from, basically, having that credit, I got some opportunities to do some other things. I did a book for Image called Hell Yeah, which is kind of my first superhero book. And I've been almost 10 years now. I've been making my entire living off coloring comics. So
That's actually super, right place, right time almost.
Yeah,
but
literally, I was online. Long story short, I was online on this message board saying that I wanted to, because when you're a colorist, a lot of times you hire an assistant called a flatter, which basically just traces the outlines of all the shapes. Mm-hmm. It's called flatter because it's basically flat color, and it's just something you hire someone to do, just to kind of speed up your process, because most colorists are doing 3 or 4 books a month, and it's just kind of, flatting is kind of, you don't really have to do anything artistic with it. And so anyways, I was online trying to get some flatting work, but trying to get my foot in the door with that. So I was advertising, I was going to do, flatting real cheap. I was like, I'm just going to, just try to get some experience to do some flatting. I'll do it cheap for limited time only. And I really didn't get anybody who got a hold of me, because I guess they were like, well, he doesn't know what he's doing, so we're not going to, how cheap he is, we're not going to waste money on him.
right.
So this one guy got a hold of me, and he was like, hey, Marvel got a hold of me to recolor these old books, which is basically flatting. I'll give you the editor's email if you want to talk to him. So I was like, oh, sweet, that's awesome. So I emailed this editor. I'm like, hey, dude, I hear you got some work. I would kill this. I'd love to do it. And I got this long email back saying how that guy should not have been giving out the email. I should not be contacting that editor. This is not an open call for. Basically, you should not be emailing me about this. And I was like, oh man, I screwed up my chance to work at Marvel. And so I was like, oh, that didn't work. So then I got an email maybe the next day from the same editor. He's like, look, I'm really sorry for yelling at you, but I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe that guy had posted my email address online. I thought you were going to be the first of 1,000 people emailing me about this. He's like, hey man, if here's some samples. If I had a guy drop out, so if you can do this, we'll talk. So I mean, I kind of killed it on the samples, if I do say so myself. And and he's like, and I, we actually were pretty good friends. I mean, the editor now, but yeah. So that's I did that for like, about 3 solid years, just straight much, every day, pretty much.
That's awesome. That's an incredible story. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your coloring technique. Okay. Colorists really have to set themselves apart, correct, from each other.
Yes and no.
Because of
I have a
different palettes and stuff like that.
I have a joke where if anybody gets, because a lot of times like when someone gets a hold of you to do a comic, you're like, well, what comics do you like? Because a lot of times like for independent stuff, and you're hired by the writer. Usually it's the writer who's the project manager, and like they pay for everything. And again, most editors are journalists, so a lot of times you're talking to someone who doesn't have an art background, and just to kind of like, kind of communicate with them. A lot of times you'll be like, well, do you have any comics you like the coloring in? Just to kind of give you an idea what they're looking for. And the joke I have is like if someone mentions Dave Stewart, that's a red flag. Don't work with that guy. I like Dave Stewart a lot. He's a very nice guy, but like he colors Hellboy, and that's usually what people point to. And again, like it's like they act like Dave Stewart's the first one that thought of using flat red on a character. It's but the thing is, like, the reason Hellboy works so well is because Mike Mignola's inks are so solid. So it's kind of like, usually like they're trying to get me to work on a book that looks nothing like Hellboy, and it's like, it's like I said, he's a red flag. But usually it's very broad strokes. If they, they like, I'm just trying to figure out if they like, kind of weird colors, or they like stuff that's painted or stuff that's like cell shaded like anime. Sometimes, like, especially the bigger companies, I mean, a colorist will fall behind and they'll hire someone to pick up a few pages here or there. So sometimes as a colorist, like, you're kind of somewhat approximating the style of another colorist if you have to do some fill-in.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, majority of people strangely don't notice that. So, I mean, like, you don't really have to copy the guy per se, but, you can... but like, again, you don't want to like start doing something like really, really different that's distracting. You want to kind of, you want to keep that flow going. But yeah, I don't really like when I talk to people who are trying to be colorists or up and coming, a lot of them are like, I got to think of some crazy new style to get my name out there. And I think that's a bad way to go.
Right. Because
that's artifice. I mean, it's like kind of like in the 90s where everyone's like, I'm gonna have to draw comics like Liefeld because he's the big thing. It's like, well, then it's obvious. Like, there's a difference between someone who's like doing their art, and someone who's copying someone else's art.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference between Pearl Jam and Creed. That kind of thing. So I mean, it's kind of like art's kind of like no matter what art you do, it's a combination. It's almost more what you don't do as opposed to what you do.
Right.
It's like it's what you avoid doing. I mean, again, like if you just keep doing it, you'll develop a style. You'll develop like a way you work, and you'll avoid things you don't like, probably more than you'll gravitate towards things you do like. So it's kind of things change. I mean, it's like I know there's a company called Liquid in like the early 2000s. They colored like Battle Chasers and like the X-Men comics. They had like if you look at 90s comics, like that's pretty much what 90s computer comics looked like. And there was a point in time where it was like you got to color just like Liquid or you don't get work.
Right.
And then less than 10 years later, it was like that style people just got sick of that style. So if you colored like them, then you couldn't get work doing anything because like people were just like, then like right now it's like, in the early 2000s, people really liked Brian Hitch. They really liked, kind of muddy, kind of like more like earthy colors.
Right.
Like your Ultimates. So like when I started out, I mean, people were like, I hate bright colors. I just want real earth tone. I want real kind of like airbrushy kind of earth tone. And but now it's like, we're in a phase where like people are really into more stylized artwork, like Scotty Young kind of covers and. Well, especially if you look at stuff in Marvel, there's a lot more like stylization to it, more like a graphic kind of look. So right now what's really hot is people are doing like more of a simpler, cell shaded or even kind of a flat style.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just kind of, you just kind of got to do what you do and like, have some flexibility in what you do. And, you can't really chase what the trend is because you'll always be like 10 steps behind if you're like trying to see what the big trend is,
Sure. So as a colorist, I mean, I you're on my Facebook, so I see your stuff a lot, but I recognize that you have a very specific, it seems like it's a very specific, intentional palette of colors that you use.
Yeah, a lot of that is not intentional.
Oh, really?
I mean, there's some things where it's like, For some reason, I hate royal blue. It's a color that like I don't use a lot. Like if you look at a lot of my stuff, the stuff that's blue, I usually like shift into like the greenish range.
Right.
It's just when I put down like blue, it just doesn't look right to me for the most part. So like I like to shift into this range. Like people always accuse me of like, I guess I really like magenta.
Right.
Because I guess I use like magenta and reds on a lot of things. It's just like, you just kind of gravitate towards it. I mean, there's certain things you kind of use for certain effects. Like if you're doing like an action scene or you're doing something you really want it to like stand out, usually warm colors are the way to go. If you're doing something that's kind of more like melodramatic and, you know, either scary or supernatural or kind of sad, you tend to go for like a cold palette. So it just depends on what I'm doing. And I would say a lot of the times, like it's not even something I'm somewhat conscious of. It's just like, you know, I'll have like a plan, but like it's not something like, you know, it's more intuitive than I realize it is.
So your quote unquote color palette that you don't really necessarily have is just an organic extension of of the color schemes that your eye tends to gravitate to.
More or less. I mean, it depends on the project. Like Mars Attacks is very reddish, and I just can invoke Mars.
Sure.
You know, so you know, like that's very warm. I've been doing Star Trek recently, and like for some reason I think of it like the interior of Star Trek ships being like bluish. So those tend to be, you know, I tend to have kind of like a colder palette for like the interior of like the Enterprise and stuff. I mean, every book is different. Like Drive, when I started doing it, my editor was like, his plan for Drive was we're going to do an adaptation of the soundtrack. So I mean, I like a lot of what I did Drive was a lot of like neon, kind of really kind of like electric, kind of harsh colors, which I thought worked really well for Drive, but it's like, you know, that doesn't translate to like, you know, Star Trek. So
right.
Every color, I mean, everything's different, but it's also one of those things where like, you know, I'm kind of in the thick of it. So what you see my artwork is probably something either like I just do intuitively or like maybe I don't see myself just because
you just do what you do.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's certain things I like doing and I do
right.
like on purpose. Like if you're looking at, either your listeners can't see, but if you're looking at like Catwoman and Ray here, both of them have white backgrounds, so both of them have like a slight like color outline to them.
Right, yeah.
And that's just because I don't like that harsh transition to a white background.
I'm the same way, yeah.
So like I just have that little outline so it's just not so, you know, like it's a little detail, but I think it makes them stand out a little bit more.
So when you were first breaking into this, as it were, and you really kind of buckled down and said, okay, this is, I'm going to try and get myself into this, how much time did you spend really practicing different things? Or, I mean, did you do a lot of research? Not just, I mean, you have some background in graphic design. Yeah, so you knew your way around like Adobe and different programs like that.
Yes and no. I paint exclusively in Photoshop. When I was in college and for most of my graphic design career, Photoshop was only taught to me and used in a very like photo manipulative kind of way.
Right.
So a majority of stuff I was doing in Photoshop was like, you know, taking something out of a picture or, you know, like just, you know, changing the contrast or like color balance or something, or doing like photo collage but like no one I knew how to draw or paint in it. And like, I mean, there's more resources now, but like when I first started coloring, it was hard to find any kind of reliable how to do like comics in Photoshop, because it was all like how to like, you know, say like, you know, put someone's head on someone else's body kind of stuff.
Right.
And even then, like a lot of the comic stuff I found was like really bad. Like it was like using the dodge and burn tool, which is, you know, don't ever do that if you're trying to learn. So
right.
A lot of it is learning on the fly. Like I said, a lot of it's kind of like, you see this a lot with people who are starting out. Like, I mean, I have a background in painting. I know how to use acrylics and stuff, but it's like me trying to get a reliable flesh tone acrylics is like just completely alien from how I do it in Photoshop.
Right.
So it's like you have to know more about how print works, I guess, to be able to do what I do. So yeah, like I talked to a lot of people who are trying to transition from being a painter to like being a digital artist, and it's like they spend all this time like fighting the program, where like they forget like basic rules of light. Because like they'll want me to critique their stuff, and I'll be like, oh yeah, well this doesn't work and this doesn't work. And once I say that, they're like, oh yeah, I know that. I'm like, well you did it, you know, like right. That kind of thing. But like yeah, but they're spending so much time like trying to get Photoshop to do what they want it to do. It's just like they're you know forgetting all this, you know, very basic painterly stuff. Because like I mean, computer is just a different medium. It's really no different than like using watercolor or acrylic or oil. Every medium has its, you know, every technique has its own drawbacks and its own advantages. there's no button I can press in Photoshop that colors it for me. And if there was, I wouldn't use it, that kind of thing. So
Sure.
it's like, so a lot of people like forget that. Again, it's like, you can be a really good watercolorist, but if someone gives you oil paints, a little bit it translates, but you're going to spend a lot of time trying to get the oil paint to do what you want, and it's just kind of, it's that kind of thing with digital. And like, I'm still learning stuff. Like, I've been doing this for a while, but I think like last year, about this time was when I finally found my technique in Photoshop. Like I finally got Photoshop to work, 90% how I want it to work every time, with my colors and stuff. And again, it was like a really kind of simple switch I made in like how I use brushes and whatnot. So I say most of my learning how to color, like I did a lot of research and I tried to figure it out. None of that helped me. Because it's it's like researching to have a street fight. Someone says you have a plan in your face with the minute, you got a plan in your head, but the minute you get punched in the face, it all goes out the window.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is when you're a professional artist. It's like, no matter how much you prepare, it's like, once you get that book and you've got that deadline, it's like, you got to do it. So, you basically learn on the job. That's really the best way to learn any of this. If it takes you 4 months to draw a comic page, you're really not prepared to be a comic artist, if you get what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, you'll be prepared when you've got a month or less to draw a whole comic. That's when you figure things out. That's when you develop your working style and everything, when you're kind of on a deadline. There's no deadline you can invent for yourself. A deadline has to be an outside force pressing down on you.
Oh, sure. You have to be incredibly driven to give yourself your own deadline and then try and meet it. Yeah.
It's not a real deadline unless you have an outside force pressing down on you where there are consequences to you not making a deadline.
Right.
So, that's, you learn on the job. That's, how you'll learn. So, if people, when people are colorists, they ask me to critique their stuff. A lot of times, I need to critique by going okay, well, talk to me next time when you've done 100 pages. And they laugh at me. But 100 pages is 5 issues.
Right.
You won't know, if you do 5 more pages, you won't have learned anything. Do 100 pages and then talk to me. Because then you'll have learned something just by the virtue of having done it that much.
Right, sure.
So yeah, but again, you said they're laughing that 100 pages, that's impossible. It's there's colorists who do 100 pages a month. What do you think you'll be doing in your job? There's no apprenticeship for coloring. It's if you get hired to do a book, you're expected to do that book.
Right.
Whatever any comic publisher. Because it's people are well, how do I work for Marvel? It's well, before you work for Marvel, you've got to work at work your way up the industry. I want to do that. It's well, you don't want to be a colorist then. I don't know what to tell you. Work for one of the second or third tier companies first. They don't have to deal with you. It's they only want people who have done coloring for a few years. They don't. They want to make sure you get all your mistakes out of your system before you come to them.
Right, of course.
So it's that kind of thing.
All right, Jason. Thanks a lot. I'm glad to have finally got you on. I know I'd been telling you multiple times that I'd like to get you on, and even though it's in this venue, I'm glad to have talked to you, man.
Yeah, well, get a hold of me anytime.
If anybody wants to find things that you can do, is there any way that they can buy your prints outside of doing a show or anything like that?
Sure. I usually, don't do that a lot, but I have done that. Get a hold of me on Twitter. It's Louis Jason R on Twitter. My name kind of scrambled. Prints are kind of a gray area, so I don't advertise I sell prints, but if you see me in a show and you remember something I have, or if you see me post something, you can always inquire. Worst I can do is say I don't have prints of that.
All right, man. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
No problem.